Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to be here. I was tempted to dance on stage, but unfortunately my dance moves aren't that great, so I thought I'd better not embarrass myself and instead talk to you about dealing with difficult stakeholders, which I believe is an important skill for us product people, an important leadership skill for us product people. Now, when we interact with difficult people, there's usually an element of disagreement or conflict. So we may disagree with what a stakeholder says or how the individual says it, or we may even dislike the person. And I think conflict is natural. We experience conflict at work and at home. It may not be always pleasant when we experience it, but it's part of our life, part of being a human being. Now, why is dealing with difficult people and managing conflict particularly important for us as a product management community? I think it's really due to the nature of the role that we have. It's a highly networked role, and we have to interact with different groups, different groups of people who have different interests, perspectives, and needs. And whenever people with different interests or perspectives engage, then there's likely to be some friction, some disagreement, some dispute, and some conflict. So you may find that you have a potentially large and heterogeneous group of users and customers who may have different ideas and different concerns and different needs. And so you have to attend to those individuals and understand their needs, and then work with business stakeholders who are likely to come from different business units, departments, maybe somebody from sales, a sales rep, a marketeer, a support person, and other business stakeholders. And again, because they come from different departments, they may have different ideas, they may have different interests, they may have conflicting goals. And then we work with one or more development teams. And in an agile setting, a development team is cross-functional, multidisciplinary. So again, people have different skills, they have different backgrounds, they may have different perspectives. And so as we engage with these different groups of individuals, and these different groups have different ideas and perspectives, we're likely to experience difficulties and we're likely to experience conflict. And so the solution for me is not to try and avoid conflict. I think that's impossible. We can try and suppress it, but I don't think that's healthy. But learn to deal with conflict and difficult people in a constructive way, so that disagreements and conflicts are a source of innovation and creativity. They move our products forward. They help us build connections and reach out to people and maybe learn something about ourselves. So I thought to make this a little bit more specific, I'll introduce a little scenario to you, which is taken from my latest book called How to Lead in Product Management. So listen, I really need you to add this feature to the release, and I'm not going to take no for an answer, says Sophie, and she's the head of sales, and she stands in front of you, you being the person in charge of the product. And so you feel your shoulders tensing and your stomach tightening. Now, there is no way that you can add more work to the development effort. The development team is already struggling with the current workload. But Sophie is a powerful manager who will not be afraid to escalate the issue. What should you do? This is, of course, a purely hypothetical scenario. I wouldn't expect that any one of you has ever been in a similar situation. But what would you do? Now, you probably come up with different ideas, different strategies, how to resolve the situation, how to respond to Sophie. But in general, there are four very common, but unfortunately unhelpful strategies to deal with conflict and difficult people. And the strategies I'd like to share with you are based on a book called Say What You Mean by Oren J. Sofer. So the first option is what Sophie calls competitive confrontation. Basically standing up to Sophie and saying, no way! There is no way that I'll add more work to the development effort. You know the development team can't cope with anymore. You know the desired outcome that we've agreed to, the goal of the release that we've agreed to. You can't just come here and demand a feature. Who are you anyway? And why do you speak to me in this way? I'm not going to put up with it. No way. So you basically seek an open conflict. And this strategy is based on the idea that you are right and Sophie is wrong, and she may be the one who's to blame. I mean, she just came to your desk and demanded this feature. And so we need to put her in her place, and we need to stand up to her. We need to protect our interests. Otherwise, she'll get the better of us, right? So we'll try to win and to put Sophie in her place. Now, if that is the right strategy, dealing with a senior stakeholder, that's probably something for you to decide, but it will be one option that's open to us. Another option would be still to engage in the conflict, but in a more indirect way, in a passive-aggressive way, and use more guerrilla tactics. So here the idea is that we say, oh, we're not going to be able to win an open conflict with Sophie. So we're going to say to her, well, this is going to be really, really difficult. You're really asking a lot from us here. I'm not quite sure if we can do it, so we're not going to commit. We'll add it to the product backlog, but I'll have to go to the development team, and I don't really know. And at the same time, generally trying to be difficult, make Sophie's life difficult, or make it difficult for her to get that feature added to the product backlog. Maybe talk badly to Sophie, about Sophie to the development team, go to the development team and say, oh, just imagine what happened. Sophie came and she demanded this feature. We'll put it on the product backlog, but right at the bottom, well, don't worry, we'll never implement it. Or maybe make snide remarks about Sophie, gossip about her, talk badly to other product people about her. And again, based on the idea that we need to protect our interests. So it's Sophie's fault. We'd like to somehow win, even if it's by not seeking an open conflict. So these strategies are all around trying to win, somehow get the better of Sophie, somehow put her in her place. The other two strategies are the opposite. They're really about minimizing our losses and, in a way, letting Sophie win. So the first one would be to try and avoid the conflict. And maybe that's what some of you gravitated towards. An example here would be to say, well, is this really such a big deal? When Sophie, she seems to be a reasonable person. If she really requests this feature, she'll need it. We can always ask her why she really needs it. But if she really has to have this feature, then maybe we can help her. Well, we can't implement all the entire feature. That's impossible. But maybe part of it. So maybe split the difference and broker a compromise and broker a deal. Let's be grown-ups. Let's be sensible. Does that sound all right? The trouble with this approach is that it doesn't address the underlying issue, right? It just stays at the rational level. It stays focused on the feature request. But what's really happening here? Well, you have a stakeholder, a senior stakeholder coming to a product manager, a product owner, demanding a feature and essentially treating the individual as if she or he was a personal assistant of the senior stakeholder, but not the person in charge of the product. So I personally think Sophie's behavior here in this scenario is inappropriate and unhelpful. She's not paying respect to the role of the product person. She's not taking the empowerment and authority that a product person needs and deserves seriously, and not showing it. And secondly, I'd assume that you have product management processes established in your company. Something like regular product road mapping workshops where you invite stakeholders and you discuss feature ideas or requests and see which outcomes or goals and benefits they're related to and how they help you progress the product. And so instead of coming to the desk of the product person and trying to expedite her specific request, Sophie should have showed up at one of those road mapping workshops. So if you now strike a deal, then you essentially allow Sophie to get away with unhelpful behavior and in a way set a precedence. right? I mean, what's going to stop her from doing the same thing again? What's going to stop other stakeholders from copying the same behavior? So conflict avoidance isn't probably a good strategy either, and nor is passivity. That basically means just giving up, saying, oh, well, what can I do? It's Sophie. She's really powerful, and she's going to escalate the issue. I'm not going to win. I might as well say yes, bite the bullet. I'll have to talk to the development team and see, if we can figure something out. Maybe I can persuade them. Maybe I can offer them, I don't know, if they come in and work a few hours longer every day, or come in at the weekend, and maybe I can offer pizza and vanilla ice cream and alcohol-free beer or something else that's highly attractive, and make it happen. And again, the problem here is we're being, in a way, submissive. We're accepting Sophie's behavior, and we're not really resolving the issue. So none of those 4 strategies is a good strategy. None of it really addresses the conflict. None of it truly resolves it. And the problem with unresolved conflicts is that they don't go away. They damage relationships and they reduce productivity. So what could we do? Well, one of the approaches, one of the models that I thought I'd share with you was developed by the FBI in the United States, and it's called the Behavioral Change Stairway Model. Now, the FBI was faced with a similar but admittedly much more extreme challenge that we face as product people. So dealing with difficult people. In the case of the FBI, it's armed terrorists who've captured a group of American citizens and now demanding a ransom and threatening to kill the individuals, right? And so if you grew up in the 1980s like me with Hollywood movies, then you may say that the solution is easy. Send in a Rambo-like agent who can single-handedly free the hostages and capture the baddies. Turns out the FBI apparently have tried this approach with a low success but high mortality rate. So over the years, they've developed something else, and that's this model I'd like to share with you, which is based on a book called Never Split the Difference by a gentleman called Voss. So what we'd like to do, I would suggest, in the scenario with Sophie is encourage a positive behavior change. I'd suggest we'd like to encourage Sophie to understand that her behavior is not helpful and behave, well, in different ways. Be more collaborative, not demand a feature, but really engage in a meaningful conversation and be sensitive to our needs as the person in charge of the product. Well, this begs the question, how can we help Sophie change her behavior? Well, as Sophie is a senior stakeholder, we can't tell her what to do. And I mean, generally as product people, we don't hold transactional power. We're not the boss of the stakeholders, right? I mean, we can't force people, make people do something. Not that I would suggest that's good leadership practice in general, but it's not even an option that's open to us. Similarly, we typically can't offer an incentive. So the only way we can encourage behavior change is by influencing Sophie. But how can we influence her? I mean, how can we ensure that she actually listens to us and follows our advice? Well, this model suggests by building a trustful relationship, by building rapport. But how do we establish trust with Sophie? How can we encourage her to trust us? How can we earn her trust? Well, by empathizing with her. So by seeing things from her perspective, by understanding her ideas, her emotions, and her needs, what's driving her, what's causing her to act in the way that she's been acting. And this is very different from what I'm often tempted to do when I feel somebody's not behaving appropriately, which is explaining the person why her or his behavior is wrong, and then pointing out to the person how she or he should behave, which usually has, again, a very low success rate. Yeah. So empathizing is the opposite. Empathizing is really taking a real warm-hearted interest in Sophie, in our case, even if Sophie's behavior is inappropriate, even if we may disagree with her, and even if we may find her difficult as a person. Yeah, but still being able to reach out to her with a genuine interest. And a great way to do this is by listening actively or listening deeply to Sophie. Yeah, so again, not telling her what she should do, but rather taking an interest in what's happening for her and listening to her perspective. Now, as this model essentially is based on our ability as product people to listen effectively to stakeholders, I thought I'll share a few tips around listening practices with you. And the first one says or suggests, encourages you to be fully present and listen attentively. So I don't know how easy you found it to listen attentively to the talks today. I find it can be very challenging to be really fully present, make an effort and listen to people and sustain that. I think it was Stephen Covey who once said, often we don't listen with the intention to understand but to respond. We already start formulating an answer in our head, or arguments in our head, what we can say, how we should answer, rather than just being present and just really taking in what the person has to say. Now, why is it so important to be attentive and listen in such a way? Because it makes the person feel accepted, it makes the person feel valued and understood. I think as human beings, we know if somebody's listening to us, if somebody isn't. We can feel it, we can see it in the person's body language. But attentively listening is sometimes hard, particularly when you're caught up maybe in emotions. So, if somebody like Sophie comes to your desk and demands a feature, you may have a strong emotional reaction, and then it may be better to take some time out and postpone the conversation rather than trying to have it right there, right then, and then possibly struggling with listening attentively. The second thing I find helpful is to be respectfully curious. And take a genuine, real interest in what the person has to say, even if you disagree or even if you dislike the individual. And so, in a way, also be a little bit, cultivate a form of modesty or humbleness, and try and not judge immediately, but keep an open mind. So again, I personally find it's very easy for me to be judgmental when I listen to someone and very quickly to say, I agree, I don't agree, I like, I don't like. But the trouble with that is that, again, we don't really listen attentively, and we don't take everything in that the person has to say. The person doesn't feel understood and welcome. And accepting what somebody has to say and keeping an open mind doesn't mean that we need to approve. But it's key to build trust. It's key to build a connection and a relationship. And I think when it comes to data collection and analytics, as a product management community, we have this great guideline to separate data collection from data analysis. And I think when it comes to difficult conversations, we should follow the same guideline. So first listen, then maybe pause and think about what we've heard, and then decide how to respond. And the last tip I'd like to share with you is not only listen for the facts, but also then go deeper and listen for feelings and needs, to truly understand what's happening for the person and be able to empathize with the individual. So feelings usually manifest themselves in the body language. So if Sophie comes to our desk and she's got a red face and she speaks loudly, then she's probably angry. And I guess that's an important, helpful clue. And the needs is really what triggers the emotions and what, in a way, explains the way people behave. And a good way to uncover needs is by asking open questions. So, asking Sophie, help me understand why this is so important to you, or help me understand why you maybe feel upset. So, dealing with difficult people, in my mind, is part and parcel of being a product professional. And I really think it's at least as important as other product management work, like product road mapping or prioritizing the product backlog. And I feel that as product people, we often deprioritize things like relationship building and other people work. But I think that's a mistake. And I think in the long run, it'll come back to us in a negative way. You know, as human beings, we're complex social entities, and I think in our work that's so connected, and where we relate to so many different individuals and so many different groups, it's important to bring that to mind and pay attention to it, and not just focus purely on templates, tools, frameworks, and the hard skills. And then I think I briefly mentioned this earlier. When it comes to conflicts, then it's helpful to remind ourselves that unresolved conflicts don't go away. So they linger, and they affect the relationships that we have with the individuals. They make it difficult to collaborate with those individuals. They can impact our mental well-being and reduce the productivity. You know, again, it's hard to work together with someone if we're in conflict with the individual, and if that conflict hasn't been addressed. In the different conflict resolution frameworks, similar to the different negotiation frameworks that I've looked at as part of my work of writing my new book, they're all based on the idea that we try and empathize with the other person, we try and see the perspective of the other person, and we try and resolve the issue together, and we try and focus on underlying needs, unmet needs. So what's really important to us, what's really at the root of the conflict. And finally, learning to resolve conflict for me is a key leadership skill that we should actively develop. It builds connections, it improves the work environment, it's a prerequisite for effective collaboration, I would say, and it also helps us grow as individuals and leaders. I find that often in times of difficulties, and particularly when I have challenging conversations with people and find myself in conflict, it's actually a great learning resource, and I tend to learn a lot about me, about my preconceived notions and ideas, and what's important to me, and how I work, what my defaults and habits are as a human being. So I hope that this talk was a little bit helpful for you. I very much look forward to the session later. Thank you for listening. But you can find more work about product management and particularly product leadership on my website. As I've mentioned, I've just published a new book called How to Lead in Product Management that dives deeper into stakeholder management and dealing with difficult people and resolving conflicts. And if for whatever reason you don't get to ask a question later, then please do reach out. Either talk to me today or drop me an email, and look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.